Welcome to the Connection Show. Today's guest is Tina Yeager. She's so amazing. You're going to be just so inspired about her topic on my mess and his masterpiece. So I think that you're going to really enjoy getting connected with Tina Yeager. So stay tuned. She's got so many amazing things to share with you. And as you listen to her topic today, we hope that for you, you'll look at the similarities of her story in your own life so you can receive transformation in your life. So stay tuned and get ready to hear this amazing woman share her life with you. And hopefully your lives will be transformed today as well. Thanks for joining us.
The Connection Show. Inspiring hope, health, healing. Connecting the dots of your story and transforming your life. Sponsored by Brave Heart Workshops, live with Jill Reynolds.
The Connection Show, inspiring hope, health, and healing, sponsored by Brave Heart Workshop, live with Jill Reynolds. And joining me today is Tina Yeager. Welcome, Tina, to the show.
Thank you, Jill. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, I'm privileged to have you on a show, and we're in a group together, and it was great to meet you this last week. And so I'd love to have you, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about who you are and what your life was like so that hopefully your story will connect the dots with others. So if you can take us back to little Tina growing up and what life was like for you, and then take us on a journey.
All right. Well, it may not be the same as anyone else's journey, but Jesus meets us where we are. And I do remember being a little child, 3 or 4 years old, praying to Jesus and asking for forgiveness when I stole the penny jar from my parents' bedroom. So he was always my friend. And through most of my childhood, because I was kind of a weird little kid that didn't fit in with any of the other kids, and the other kids just didn't know what to do with me. I didn't really make a lot of friends. So most of my childhood, Jesus was my only friend, and I would walk with him, and sometimes I would reach out to the air beside me and grab hold like I was holding his hand to walk with him and talk with him. And if only I had stayed in that place where it was good enough to have Jesus be my only friend, I would have been better off. But because I just so desperately longed for acceptance from other people, I began to develop this sense of personal shame and body image issues. And maybe if I was thinner and I just sort of blended into the wall space and just didn't take up any room, and I began to get an eating disorder at about 12 years old, and that lasted for 8 years. I was starving myself to try to be at least acceptable. I didn't believe anybody would love me or like me, but I just wanted to be able to be accepted in that space. And when I went to college, I made even more bad choices and went out and did all the partying, trying to fit in, but I knew that people would just as soon step over my dead body if I dropped dead in the middle of the party. They didn't care about me. I was just entertaining to be around. And that was my point, just to pretend just for a little while that people might like me. And eventually that didn't go well either, because an eating disorder and drinking doesn't go well together. When you drink on an empty stomach, you end up in the hospital with alcohol poisoning. So those kinds of things just kind of came to a full head, and eventually I ended up being assaulted and walking along a gutter and saying to the Lord, finally, I'm talking to him about something, but I'm saying to him, I don't want to live here anymore. Just take me out of the world. I don't want to be alive anymore. I just might as well wash down the drain with the rest of the sewage, because I'm not worth anything. I shouldn't have turned away. I knew that. I knew I shouldn't have been seeking other people's attention. And I knew that this was wrong. And yet, instead of God ending my physical life, he ended my life that way. So he took me from that place and eventually drew me back into right relationship with him. When I got pregnant, I was more focused on the baby's health. So that kind of brought me out of the eating disordered behavior. And then he showed me through other people telling me I was a good listener that I should move into counseling. And I became someone who listened to other people who had even greater trauma than I could ever have imagined before. And I began to see that shame was a recurring issue among women. And he brought me from being the person who wanted to die and didn't believe she could be loved to being someone who brought God's love to other people and shared hope and healing with them. So that's kind of my story of transformation. God brought me from nothing and worthlessness to being someone that he could use.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'd like to take the dots back a little further. So you're a therapist, so you'll love how I do my show. So I like to take the recorder and go back. So let's go back to that little girl that used to talk to Jesus and was very alone. Do you have any memory, Tina, with connecting the dots of where that aloneness and feeling isolated except with Jesus started to take place? Was something going on in the home? Something going on generationally in the family that was starting to make you more like that lost little girl back in the day when you would just walk and talk to Jesus?
Well, I was just sort of that kid that didn't quite fit in socially with other kids. I was very academic. I learned to read when I was 3, and you'd think that'd be a good thing. But then when you're so far ahead that they stick you in the corner by yourself in the classroom instead of involving you with the other kids in the class, then you end up not really learning to connect with the other kids and not being included. And the kids don't like you when they think that you have the answers to the questions the teacher's asking. So it's not about me trying to be the teacher's pet, but it was the kids seeing me that way. So that's kind of it wasn't a trauma thing like a lot of people have experienced. And I have tremendous compassion for that. It was more just something that would have otherwise been not a bad thing, but it ended up being an isolating thing.
So that was back when you were in like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, where you were starting to feel alone and different than your classmates by being so intelligent with this being smart. And my little granddaughter's like that. At 4 years old, she memorized all the presidents of the United States in order, and could memorize an entire book of the Bible, believe it or not. She's like, it blows my mind. So when you were going through that and feeling that aloneness, did you have other children in your family? Were you the only child?
I was the oldest child. My younger brother, I would sometimes try to bring him in and we'd play like teacher or something, school or something like that. But then that got old and he wanted to do other things. So eventually I would try to make up stories and maybe some of the other kids would play and we'd play the story out as we were playing. But usually it was more me just having to read or doing something on my own when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah. And so as the dots connected then, and the 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, the little girls, I mean, you start, and I have a block in my own mind, but you start menstruation and you start forming different parts of your body, your breast form and stuff. So as you were at that like 12-year-old age and things in your body were starting to change, had you still felt isolated and alone, so that perpetuated the eating disorder to begin?
Yes, I think so. And I do even remember I would always over-exercise. I even hid things like laxatives to try to help, get rid of anything I did have to eat because I couldn't hide that I wasn't eating. And that was after my parents, when I was about 12 or 13, my elbows were the biggest part of my arm. And my parents said they were going to get me to a psychiatrist. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to have to hide this better. And even though they were good parents, an eating disordered person is, in a way, it's similar to the way an addict will hide their addiction very effectively. No matter how good your parents are, if you are compulsive in your behavior and you're really attached to that stronghold, that will definitely override a parent's attempts at intervention a lot of times. So
And so at that point, then, with the warning they gave you, you hit it, and they did not act out on it and get you help at that time.
they didn't think I was still eating disorder. They were no longer aware of it. I would go for a walk. I eventually in high school, I got a job. So when I wasn't home for dinner, they didn't know I wasn't eating. So I would pretend I was eating while I was out, but I wasn't. So
And they weren't noticing at all that your size was getting smaller and smaller.
no, I was very good at covering that up too. So
Yeah, yeah. And so, so with that perpetuating, let me ask, did you, because you said you just had a brother, did your mom or dad ever, did you notice them ever having body image issues? Did you ever notice them talking about food in different contexts of good or bad food?
well, my mom did some things where she was trying to feed us well, but she was controlling all the portion sizes. And so I do remember that that was one of her things that she was dealing with that I didn't really understand. It was something that's her story to tell, but she was doing some things where she would have just this much amount of the main dish and the side dish, and any snacks had to be approved of. So there was a little bit of that going on, and some of it was financial and some of it was just mom dealing with some things of her own. So
But did you start catching on to that yourself a bit, where you had to minimize because you were starting to see that smaller portions were okay, and so you just got smaller and smaller with the portion sizes as you observed it in the home?
I think I was so rebellious that I wanted to control it even more by just not eating at all. And I think that was a little bit of me taking control back of what I was eating instead of somebody else telling me how much I could eat.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
in a sense, there were even times when I took the poison control kit out and used the Ipecac syrup to try to get sick. And my mom noticed that it was looking a little watered down, and I made excuses, and she didn't press into it.
So did you go from anorexia into bulimia as well?
I was not very good at making myself throw up, but in college when I was doing the drinking, I think that was part of the mentality. I knew that if I drank enough, that I would just throw everything up.
Yeah,
So
you'd
that was
spin,
kind of part of it.
yeah, you'd spin out, and at that point you'd have no control anyway from spinning
Yeah.
out. Yeah. So did you go into treatment? Did you go to get help eventually?
No, I didn't. And I don't recommend that. It took a lot longer to heal, not just the physical behavior, because that is not the hardest part to get past, but the mindsets of somebody who has body image issues. Those are harder to let go of. And those continue to be something that I work through with God's help. But I don't recommend that that's all that you do. I do recommend that if you can get to somebody that you trust, you should work through that. I did go to a counselor that was a student counselor while I was on campus in college, and it wasn't a good experience, but I didn't try again. So I did remember that as a therapist later. And when I'm speaking, I always recommend that people, if you go to a one experience and it's not a good experience, don't let that stop you from trying again, because it probably would have been a faster, easier road if I had chosen to continue trying to find a therapist that worked well with me.
Well, and I think there's good and bad doctors, good and bad therapists, good and bad pastors, priests that sexually, I mean, there's just good and bad in the world. In this world we will have trouble. But you said one comment. I highly recommend. I personally highly recommend seeking treatment for those that have gotten that far down the path, as far as at least getting an assessment. I think professional assessments are very good to do when you're into an eating disorder or an addiction, because our minds are so malnourished, and it's everyone does not unfortunately find God immediately and get well.
Right.
I happen to have been one of those that, God took hold of me right in the middle of my crack cocaine addiction and alcoholism and pretty much delivered me. My codependency was much harder to work on, and my eating disorder caused me to have 5 times in treatment before I was able to recover. So everyone is different. And so I think it's so important. I led Eating Disorders Anonymous meetings for 4 years and got lots of telephone calls from moms or dads or brothers or husbands or sisters saying, what do I do? And my first foremost answer would be, please see if your loved one will call a treatment center and get a free consultation and an assessment so that the professionals can determine the severity of it. Because when you're in the middle of that disease and your brain is malnourished, it's very difficult yourself to know how bad you are. And if your family members are in denial, then, not everyone like yourself or me with my drug and alcohol find God right away for healing. And so I think that's such an important thing to put out there, that there is some phenomenal treatment centers in the country. And I was blessed to go to some. Some weren't as good as the others, some.
Right.
But I also do believe it's not necessarily the treatment center that's good or bad. It's your mindset when you go into treatment. Are you willing to go to every length to get better? And if you're not, and you're being forced, now if your parents or some loved ones forcing you into treatment, it's very difficult to get well. Very difficult.
I agree. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that I would much more recommend what you're saying over what I did. Don't do what I did. Go and find somebody to help you, because that was a long, windy, twisty road, and you don't need to go through all of that to take forever to get through that. You can really streamline that process by finding the right person. And sometimes it's not that the person that you find that isn't a good fit for you is a bad counselor. It may just not be a good fit for you, because not every counselor is the right counselor for every client.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I learned also, Tina, in treatment, because when you're in treatment, number one, you have a treatment team. So you might have a primary therapist, a primary psychiatrist, but we were in groups all the time. So I mean, in treatment, I probably had 7 different therapists that worked on different things. My most favorite in the whole world is Dr. Laura Wood, who was our drama therapist, and we did improv comedy with her too to offset the heaviness with laughter. And she was everybody's favorite counselor. I mean, we absolutely loved drama therapy. And so each group had significance. So when I got out of treatment, I created my own treatment team. I created my IFS therapist, my EMDR therapist. I created my own team because I had some really good healthcare insurance. Some people don't. So, there are different ways, and there are so many amazing 12-step recovery and Celebrate recovery groups today that help you get some support as well. But so going back with the connecting of the dots for yourself, so you're going through these severe body image issues in high school, junior high and high school, and then through college, the drinking began. And so let's go back, if you wouldn't mind, and if you do, share with the sexual assault that occurred. Can you kind of walk us through the healing process you went through that? Because I too have been date raped, and so it's devastating. And many times when trauma occurs, we disassociate and we push it down, and we don't talk. We talk about it as though we went to a Tupperware party. So we'll say something like, "I was sexually molested," or "I was date raped." Okay, but break it down of the healing process you went through and how that took place. Because again, you weren't in therapy yet, right? You had not done any of your own personal work.
Correct. That was the trigger to trying to go see a counselor, because after that, well, I'll rewind to why this happened. I went with a friend to a club and somebody slipped a drug in my drink. And I knew it was a drug because my legs didn't work. and I couldn't walk. And these guys came along and were helping me walk, but helping me toward their hotel. Instead of helping me find my friend and get where I should have gone, they helped me to where they wanted to take advantage of the fact that I couldn't move. And I had only flashbacks as memories of what actually happened during that night. And in the morning, I do remember that when I got up, I felt like I was filthy. I just felt like the filthiest thing on the face of the planet. And that was the morning that I had to kind of escape. Somebody grabbed me by the hands and said, "No, come back in here. I won't be mean to you like my friends were." And I had to wrangle my way out and get out the door and get out. And the sun just felt too bright. I felt like I should be in the shadows, in the darkness, and just hide. And that was when I made my way to the gutter. I was on my way to go look for wherever it is that my friend might have ended up. We didn't have a hotel room booked. I didn't know how I was going to find her, but I just wanted to wash away with sewage and die. I just didn't want to live anymore at that point. And I do remember that. That was hard to get past, and it was hard to trust men after that. I didn't have a real high value of men after that. And that was a process where God had to just, for years after that, had to kind of just really work me through that. And there was even a date rape situation that happened before that situation. And it was only a couple of months before that. So this was like a double whammy kind of situation. And I was having just like flashbacks where I would just see this happen. And it was acute stress. If you're familiar with the difference between PTSD and acute stress disorder, it was only, the flashbacks only happened for the first couple of months after the attack. It wasn't an ongoing for years and years kind of nightmares and flashbacks, sort of a trauma. But this was something that caused God to kind of work on me through that forgiveness process for years. It was actually harder to forgive the date rape from the person that knew me than it was to forgive the people who didn't even know me. Because the people didn't know me. You know, this was something they were conditioned to do. It didn't excuse the behavior, but they weren't doing it to me personally. They were doing it to someone they'd objectified and thought of as less than human. So it was easier to forgive that, but the date rape one was harder. And then like years and years later, after I was married and I already had my first child, I got a phone call from the person who date raped me. He said that he went to the altar to give his life to Jesus, and the Lord told him to call me and ask for my forgiveness.
Wow.
And that helped me let go of that, all of that. And that doesn't happen either. So I don't tell that story very often because that isn't usually the way God helps you forgive. You have to really choose to forgive. But that was a gift that God gave me and him, actually, so that he could be free of that.
Wow. That's powerful. That's really beautiful. And now, did you tell your mom or dad? Did anybody know about the two rapes that you had had?
I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want to burden them with that. I actually had very good, loving parents. And I know a lot of people go through eating disorders and trauma because they had neglect or abuse in their family. But I had very good parents, actually, and still went through all of those things because of my desire to be accepted by other people. So,
yeah. Well, we can have good parents, but there's still a lot of codependency in the looking good family. You know, codependency can still run very deep in families that are very loving, and so it can, you know, there's that manifestation and that fear that sets in of why do we not return to the parents that we love, and why do we carry that burden of codependency that we're more worried that they're going to carry the burden. So you can maybe address that a little, because you said you didn't want to burden them, and yet here you were. Your life was to the point of almost suicide, and you had so much self-hate for yourself that to put that burden onto a loving family Share that a little bit about where that comes from. Where does that come from, where you're so much more worried about them than yourself?
I think I just didn't want them to be worried about me or to be sad or to feel like it was their fault in any sort of way. So I know that they had tried to get me treatment when I was in middle school, and then I hid it better, and I didn't want them to blame themselves for not giving me treatment when I needed it and didn't want it and probably would have refused it anyway. So I didn't really want them to feel bad about something that was ultimately, a lot of that was based on my own personal decisions. It wasn't based on anything that they had done wrong as parents. I mean, they went to parenting classes. They did everything they could possibly do to be as good a parents as they could be. So I didn't want this to make them feel as though they had failed.
Now, do they know about it now, though? Have you been able to share it with them?
Some of it, some of it. They are aware that I had an eating disorder because I've told that story before publicly. I don't know if I've shared with them the assault stories before, and if they were to find out about it, that would be fine. But because at this point it's been so long ago. But
Yeah. So at what point then, okay, so you got married. How old were you when you got married?
I was 20. I was 20 years old.
Oh, okay. Because now the assaults happened in college, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
that was
right before that.
So like 18, 19, and then you did meet someone and got married. That's pretty quick after assaults. So
Yeah.
how did you meet your husband, and how did that come into where you could trust him?
Well, that's a very long story. I kind of met him in the middle of not doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. I found him at a bar I wasn't even supposed to be in because I was too young to be at the bar, and sharked him in a game of pool, actually. So it wasn't exactly the little wonderful Christian come together couple moment exactly. So, and that was a whole nother process. So
I love that because I did the pool sharking too. My girlfriend and I, we were hitchhiking around the United States, and we used to go into the pool halls and put our quarter down to shark guys and act like we didn't know how to play pool. And then we'd win and make enough money to go to the next city and have food to eat for a day or two, and then do the pool sharking. So you meet your now husband in a bar. And so where did that manifest with the two of you then coming to Christ? How did that come into fruition? Because you're both now, meeting, and you hadn't been yet walking with God, had you?
off and on. I mean, there were still times when I would pray, but I wasn't living like a Christian. So I was kind of, yes, I believe you. I believe in you, God, but I'm going to kind of leave you to where I can still do the things that I'm not supposed to be doing. So it wasn't as though I walked away from believing in him or even praying, because I would still pray sometimes, but I wasn't seeking his guidance, and I wasn't following the way I should have been living, and I should have known better. And in that time, I remember when we finally were going to get married, I asked if he believed in God, because, you're not supposed to marry somebody who didn't believe in God. And I was kind of at that point of wanting to make that shift back. And I thought he was a Christian, because he said he thought he was, with a certain denomination. And then, turned out he didn't want to have anything to do with it for quite a long time. So that was another battle after that, as having that spiritual battle. And he's recently, in the last few years, just really become a very strong believer. So, but for a very long time, that was kind of a back and forth battle for him.
Wow. So then here now you're in a marriage and you're wanting to get close to God, and you can't have those conversations at home.
Right.
I find that interesting, because the Lord's giving me goosebumps. He loves to connect the dots of story. And, I find it interesting that you almost brought yourself all the way back to being a little girl of isolation, even in the marriage, when it came to the one joy that you'd love to talk about, which was Jesus, with the one person you trusted the most at that point in your life, which was your husband. So I find that interesting, how we connect the dots. and kind of go back to that feeling of isolation. Even when you're in a marriage, you can be totally isolated when you can't have that connection with God, with the person you're married to.
Yeah, it was quite a back and forth for a long time, but eventually he made that decision to stop fighting against God and start moving toward God. And so instead of, for a long time I thought he would just probably leave me for somebody else who liked to party, because that's kind of where I was at when I met him initially, and then he was still there and I was not. And then eventually I just kind of thought, well, one day he's going to leave me, but I'm going to do the best I can to be the wife that God wants me to be and to support him and to love him where I'm at now. And if that happens, I'll know I did everything I could have done. And then eventually God brought him full circle back around into relationship with him. And instead of getting a different husband, I have a new husband that happens to be the one that I married.
Wow. And how many children do you guys have?
We have two. We have a son that's 30 and a son that's 24.
Oh, awesome. Now, were you able then, having an unequally yoked marriage, were you able to raise your children in the church, or did your husband not want you taking them to church with you?
No, he never told me I couldn't take the kids to church. Early in the marriage, when my oldest was a baby, he did get a little angry, and it was not him, it was the stronghold pulling him away. And he did say, "Don't ask me to go to church again." And that wasn't really him. That was that stronghold just digging its claws into him and trying to pull him away from God. But eventually he did decide that he wanted to go. And so now he's the one that's really super interested in finding a church. So
your husband or your son?
My husband. My kids were raised in the church and went to youth group and went on mission trips and did all sorts of things like that.
So have you guys connected to a church that you both like now, or are you still looking?
We did, but we've recently moved twice. We moved right before the pandemic and in the middle of the pandemic. And so we're still kind of trying to find the right church where we're at. We're attending, we're visiting, but we haven't found the right fit just yet.
Yeah, you'll know. It's hard when you make those moves. I moved from Chicago after being at one church for 40 years and had to seek again. So it's difficult. So when did you become a therapist then? We're in the marriage. So you're married at 20. So when did you go into counseling and therapy?
It was funny. I was in college when I was pregnant with my first child in my bachelor's degree. So when I was pregnant with my second child, I went into my master's degree. So that was, let's see, what year was that? 2005 is when I finally got licensed. So I think it was the year 2000 that I graduated. Or was it when I graduated or when I started? I can't remember the exact year, but it was somewhere around that. So my son was born in 1998. So it would have been 1997 that I started my master's program.
So did you then did you yourself then, because you're going through all this classes, getting your bachelor, your master's, did you then go back and find yourself a good Christian therapist and do your own personal work?
Well, by then I actually was good. I had actually done all that healing work on my own. So, because that had been like a good, at least 8-10 years after all of the other stuff had kind of come to a close.
So you yourself never have gone through any counseling yourself?
I have not.
Okay.
They do require you to do some counseling as a practicum. Mm-hmm. So there was that, but that isn't actually really doing counseling.
Well, you're not really doing it because you're trying to work on yourself. You're doing it just to observe more as
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's move over. I want to show them your bio here. So I'm going to pull your bio up where Tina's an award-winning author, and this has her website on it that you can find her. So when did the writing begin?
That was something the Lord called me to when my oldest child was just 1 year old. So that was a really long time ago, 29 years ago. And I started writing. I didn't know what I was supposed to write. So I wrote just children's stories for my son. And I sent them off to a relative to illustrate them and didn't hear back from them. And then that kind of got lost in the raising of my child and then in working on my master's degree. And then when I got out of my master's degree, I came back to that because I remembered that I had been called about 20 years prior to that. And then I wrote a novel and went through this whole, this was a huge, long journey of perseverance of the writing and publishing battle. So it took, because I published with a predatory publisher because I didn't know any better. And I had never been to a writer's conference and I didn't know you weren't supposed to use that particular publisher. And when I went to a writer's conference and they saw that on the back of my book, they said, oh, you were published by this publisher. You don't know what you're doing. And this is not good writing. And this is not a manuscript proposal. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And so that was, good. Let's see, when was that? 2006, when I had that book and I went to the first writing conference. And it took from 2006 until 2019 until I had another book published. So it was a very long time from publishing badly to actually getting traditionally published.
And what are your books about?
The first book, Beautiful Warrior, Finding Victory Over the Lies Formed Against You, is about Christ-centered self-esteem and purpose and identity for women. The new book that's coming out any moment now is called Upcycled, Crafted for a Purpose. And that's about how God takes us, much like we take junk and vintage items, and he upcycles us and makes us more beautiful and purposeful than we ever were to begin with. He takes our mess and makes it into his masterpiece.
That's really beautiful. And when's that being released?
Any moment now. We're kind of waiting on the printers to get it done. So it could be next week, the week after, very soon.
Awesome. So are you still counseling now or are you just predominantly writing?
Well, I have a license in Florida as a counselor still, but since we moved to North Carolina a couple of years ago, I'm only able to do life coaching. So I still offer that online life coaching via Zoom.
All right. Well, I really am grateful. If you can stay on just a moment when we get off, because we'll talk just offline, but I'm really grateful that you were so transparent to share your journey with the audience. And for you listening, I hope that listening to Tina has helped to transform your life today and given you some more new knowledge about your story. It's so important to share our stories and to feel connected. And one of the things that we're doing on the Connection Show is starting connection gatherings. We're meeting 3 times, 3 days of week, but not every week. So you'll have to go on the website, braveheartworkshops.com, so that you can see the dates that we're meeting for Zoom connections. So please gather in community. It's an opportunity for us to learn more about each other, have friendships formed, and have some fun, laughter, and play. Because today, we need to play a little bit more and not be so serious. So the connection gatherings can be just a time to learn about each other, find out what your bucket list getaway is or anything else you want to know. And then in closing, if any of you want to get away in February when it's cold, on the website, you'll see that we're doing an Aruba getaway for men and women to connect on the beach at amazing villas. So we still have space available for that if you want to go online and learn more. So thanks so much again, Tina, for joining us on the Connection Show.
Thank you, Jill.
Bless you, everyone. Well, it was wonderful having Tina on our show, and we hope that you've connected the dots of some of her story with your own. We'd love to share with you a little bit about the Aruba getaway and hope that you'll join us in paradise in Aruba. Thanks again for joining us today. Join us for the Hope, Health, and Healing Aruba Connections Getaway for men and women, February 5th through the 11th, 2023. Are you overworked? Stressed out? Feeling exhausted? Is it time to spoil yourself? Breathe in life and relax at private villas in Aruba for 6 nights and 7 days. Renew your mind and body. Discover greater self-awareness. Join in connection, wellness, stillness, movement, enhance inner peace. Experience amazing beaches. Enjoy snorkeling, area attractions, shopping till you drop. Dine at fabulous beachfront restaurants. Imagine releasing anxiety, reconnect with yourself, restore your soul, bring your friends. Enjoy fresh and savory cooked meals, lasting memories. Join us now. Register today. Book your flight and get away to Aruba, February 5th through the 11th, 2023. Register by going to braveheartworkshops.com. Pack now and see you on the island of Aruba. Thanks for joining us today on The Connection Show, where we bring you stories that will transform your life. The Connection Show would appreciate your support. Please go to either our Patreon page or our PayPal Me Now link today. We love our podcast show guests and appreciate our listeners and YouTube subscribers. Please go to our YouTube channel called The Connection Show and Braveheart Workshops and subscribe now. Remember to click the gray bell in the All tab so you don't miss any upcoming episodes.